Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's start our today's class for the preparation of scientific officer of plant breeding and genetics. Today's class number is 15 and question types are MCQs, and this section of class is managed by APPSER. So we move towards our first question, and the first question is that an enzyme required for the assembly of an RNA primer in DNA replication is called primase, RNase, DNase, or polymerase. And the correct one is a primase. An enzyme required for the assembly of an RNA primer in DNA replication is known as primase. Next question is that a short nucleotide segment that provides a free 3OH end for internucleotide linkage is called probe, oligonucleotide, tag polymerase, or primer. And the correct one is a primer. A primer is a short nucleotide segment that provides a free 3OH end for internucleotide linkage. Our next question is that a short nucleotide segment used to identify the segment of DNA is called primer, probe, primase, or plasmid. And the correct one is a probe. Probe is a short nucleotide segment that is used to identify the segment of DNA. Next question is that a measure of linear association between independent variables is called covariance, variance, regression, or correlation coefficient. And the correct one is a correlation coefficient. The measure of the linear association between two independent variables is called correlation coefficient. Our next question is that of the two sex chromosomes in man dash containing genes X chromosome, Y chromosome, Y chromosome, X chromosome, and none of these. And the correct one is a X chromosomes. Of the two sex chromosomes in man, X chromosomes containing genes. In man, genes responsible for color blindness are sex-linked and dominant, recessive, codominant, or epistatic. And the correct one is a recessive. In man, genes responsible for color blindness are sex-linked and in recessive in nature. Hardy-Weinberg rule formed the basis for a new branch or science known as genetics, population genetics, evolutionary genetics, or modern genetics. And the correct one is a population genetics. Hardy-Weinberg rule formed the basis for a new branch or science is known as population genetics. Our next question is that according to Hardy-Weinberg formula, if the frequency of A allele in a population is equal to 0.6, then the expected frequency with capital A genotype is 0.6, 1.2, 0.36, or 3. And the correct one is a 0.36. If the frequency of A allele in a population is equal to 0.6, then the expected frequency of capital A genotype is 0.36. Towards our next question, the degree of freedom to test the significance of simple linear correlation of n samples is n minus 1, n minus 2, n minus 3, n minus 4. And the correct one is a n minus 2. The degree of freedom to test the significance of simple linear correlation of n samples is n minus 2. The DNA molecule resulting from union of DNA derived from different sources is called hybrid, recombinant DNA, or satellite DNA. And the correct one is a recombinant DNA. DNA molecule resulting from union of DNA derived from different sources is called recombinant DNA. A physical map of genotype derived from the cleavage of DNA is called restriction map, genetic map, chromosome map, or molecular map? And the correct one is a restriction map. A physical map of genome derived from cleavage of DNA is called a restriction map. Our next question is that the DNA of relatively higher density in a eukaryotic cell is called satellite DNA, macro DNA, DNA, or repetitive DNA. And the correct one is a satellite DNA. A DNA of relatively higher density in a eukaryotic cell is called satellite DNA. The fusion of different somatic cells is called somatoblast hybridization, somatic hybridization, or plasmatic hybridization. And the correct one is a somatic hybridization. The fusion of different somatic cells is called somatic hybridization. Our next question is that coefficient of variance can be calculated as standard error by mean, variance by mean, standard deviation by mean, or mean by standard error. And the correct one is a standard deviation by mean. Coefficient of variance can be calculated as standard deviation over mean. Our next question is that broad sense heritability can be calculated as VG over VE, VG over VP, VP over VE, or VG over VE. And the correct one is a VG over VP. Broad sense heritability can be calculated as VG over VP. Next question is that heritability can be defined as an index of transmissibility of genes from one generation to another generation, an index of transmissibility of gene from generation to another generation, an index of transmissibility of genes from progeny to parents, an index of transmissibility of genes from one offspring to another. And the correct one is an index of transmissibility of genes from one generation to another generation. An index of transmissibility of genes from one generation to another generation is the correct option for the definition of heritability. Next question is that a cell carrying two different nuclei is called heterozygous, heterokaryon, heterogametic, or heteroblast. And the correct one is a heterokaryon. Heterokaryon, a cell carrying two different nuclei called heterokaryon. Next question is that the form of a gene that is considered the standard or typically found in nature is called as mutant type, wild type, dominant type, or original type. And the correct one is a wild type. A form of gene that is considered the standard or typically found in nature is called as wild type. Our next question is that inheritance of acquired character is also as Darwinism, Lamarckism, epigeneticist, or none of these. And the correct one is a Lamarckism. Acquired inheritance of acquired character is also known as Lamarckism. Moving towards next question, according to Hongo de Varies, new species could be produced in generation single, two, few, or large number of. And the correct one is a single. According to Hongo de Varies, new species could be produced in generation single. Dash is the forces that determine the gene frequencies in a population through unequal rate of reproduction in different genotypes, mutation, natural selection, evolution, or variation. And the correct one is a natural selection. Natural selection actually is the forces that determines the gene frequencies in a population through unequal rates of reproduction in different genotypes. Our next question is that the chromosomes during cell division moves through spindle fibers, centrioles, centrosomes, kinetochore, and the correct one is the spindle fibers. The chromosomes during cell division moves through spindle fibers. Our next question is that the body cells are called plasma cells, gametic cells, somatic cells, or stem cells, and the correct one is a somatic cells. Our body cells are known as somatic cells. Next question, the genes which control the expression of other genes are called repressor genes, alexandric genes, controller genes, or regulatory genes. And the correct one is a regulatory genes. The genes which control the expression of other genes is called as regulatory genes. A tiny cell with little cytoplasm produced by division of nuclear body, polar body, inert body, or bar body. And the correct one is a polar body. A tiny cell with little cytoplasm produced by division of polar body. Next question is that phenotypic correlation is the association of phenotypic progenies of one trait to phenotypic progenies of another, phenotypic progenies of one trait to genotypic progenies of another, genotypic progenies of one trait to phenotypic progenies of other, or none of these. And the correct one is a phenotypic progenies of one trait to phenotypic progenies of another. What question? The question is that phenotypic correlation is the association of phenotypic progenies of one trait to phenotypic progenies of an other trait. This is the correct option. Our next question is that genetic variance is equal to phenotypic variance plus environmental variance, phenotypic variance minus environmental variance minus phenotypic variance, and the correct one is a phenotypic variance minus environmental variance. Genetic variance is equal to phenotypic variance minus environmental variance. Our next question is that the division of single population in which mating between the males and females of different populations take place into two or more groups due to some barriers is called as reproductive isolation, sexual and physiological isolation, mechanical isolation, or hybrid sterility. And the correct one is a reproductive isolation. What? The division of single population in which mating between male and females of different populations take place into two or more groups due to some barriers is called as reproductive isolation. Now we move towards our next question. The acclimatization of an individual an organism to a change in an environment is called mutation, adaptation, evolution, or isolation. And the correct one is a adaptation. Acclimatization of an individual organism to a change environment is called adaptation. Our next question is that variance is equal to square root of standard error, square root of standard error, square of standard error, square root of standard deviation, or square of standard deviation. And the correct one is a square of standard deviation. Variance is equal to square of standard deviation. Next question, simply inherited traits is also called Mendelian traits, quantitative traits, complementary traits, or sex-linked traits. And the correct one is a Mendelian trait. Mendelian traits, simply inherited traits. Simply inherited traits also called Mendelian traits. Our next question, the exchange of genetic material between bacterial cells takes place by transduction, transformation, conjugation, or hybridization. And the correct one is a conjugation. The exchange of genetic material between bacterial cells takes place by conjugation. Our next question is that the viruses which infect bacteria are called bacteriovirus, plasmid, provirus, or bacteriophage. And the correct one is a bacteriophage. The viruses which infect the bacteria are called bacteriophage. Our next question is that the code present on transfer RNA for an messenger RNA code CCU is GGT, GGA, CCU, GGU, and the correct answer is GGA. VA over VP is used to calculate heterosis, heritability broad sense, heritability narrow sense, or hybrid weaker. And the correct one is a heritability narrow sense. VA over VP is used to calculate